Hey folks, long time no see. For folks who were at the Open Sauce Hacktoberfest check-in about 15 minutes ago, I'm back. Welcome back to Nikki T Live. My name's Nick Taylor, your host, and today I'm hanging out with Amy Dutton, RedwoodJS core team member, designer, and extraordinaire of everything. You've written some courses, you got all kinds of stuff. So for folks who might not know who you are, Amy, would you mind just kind of giving the lowdown, I guess, of who is Amy?
Yeah, sure. So I am a designer and a developer, one of those weird ones, and have spent a majority of my career doing agency work and branding and stuff like that. But I'm currently doing open source, which has been just a fantastic experience so far and really enjoying that. And also have a YouTube channel at Self Teach Me, and I co host a podcast called Compressed FM with James Q. Quick.
Yeah, no, awesome. Yeah, that's compressed FM is where, well, I've never met you, but like that's where I know you from. Um, yeah, and you're still doing compressed FM because I'm pretty sure I've heard some recent episodes, unless I was listening to the back catalog and not realizing. Uh,
Yeah, that's
um,
right. I'm still on there. We also, I'm glad I said co-host with James Q. Quick. We just added, like within the last week or so, a third co-host, Brad Garify. And
oh,
so
okay.
Brad has been a regular, like fill-in co-host, and so we officially added him. But I've been doing quite a few conferences lately. I went to the GraphQL conference in San Francisco, and then we
Okay.
had the Redwood JS conference. And then my family went cruising for a week. So I've been in and
Oh,
out the
awesome.
last month, really. Yeah.
Okay, I know that's awesome. So you've been a little busy. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's I wasn't able to make it to the Redwood JS Conf, but a couple of my coworkers made it down there. B Dougie, who started open source, I think gave it. Yeah,
You
he gave a
emceed.
talk. Yeah, he emceed. You're right. Yeah, sorry. And
Uh-huh.
my other awesome coworker, Becca, she gave a talk as well, and um, she was on
Yeah.
the stream with me about 15 minutes ago, and she was speaking very highly of you. So she was like, "Folks, make sure to go to the next stream." So, um,
Oh,
but
she's
yeah,
very kind. Well, the
yeah,
respect is mutual, so high praise for her as
yeah,
well.
yeah. So I guess before, like, we're definitely going to talk about Redwood JS. And for folks, because I've been corrected on this before by a couple of core team members, it's not Redwood, it's not Redwood.js, it's Redwood.js, right? Is that right?
That's right. But what's funny is when you start to read into the docs, though, it's like, okay, now we're Redwood. So it's a little confusing. And what's
Okay, okay.
hilarious is if you try and use Chat GPT to write any Redwood related content, you have to prompt it so that it knows it is not a conservation effort
Oh,
toward
okay, okay.
for the forest, that it is a dev project.
Yeah, yeah, no, gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I guess you have to add those extra prompts. We are not talking about trees. We're talking about a JavaScript framework.
That's
But
right.
yeah. Yeah, before we talk about Redwood JS, you'd mentioned you co-host the Compressed FM podcast, and I mentioned that's how I knew you. And you always do your intros, and I learned that you worked at a company called Zeal previously, so you're the head of design there, and you're also a developer too. Um, I'm curious. Well, I'm curious about your time there, or like working in design, because this is something you're really good at and love. And kind of, I'm a fan of open source, and I worked at Netlify on the frameworks team. So a lot of what we're going to talk about is definitely interesting to me. But I'm curious, what made you decide to make the switch to go full time on open source?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. So, yeah, I definitely love the time that I was at Zeal. I worked there for a total of 7 years. So I was
Okay,
there for 3 years as a contractor. So I ran my own freelance business for 7.5 years. And so 3 of those years I was doing Zeal stuff. And then right
okay, okay.
before the pandemic, I joined their team full time and really could not have planned that transition any better than I did. So I joined
Okay.
their team in June or so, and then obviously in January things started getting a little crazy or questionable, and then by March things had really
Y-
gone strange. So,
Okay.
but one of my other clients was a like boutique speakers bureau, and so obviously, if they're trying to schedule their speakers out, and I was like doing
Hmm.
branding work for all their speakers and things like that. Like suddenly, they don't have a business. So Zeal and this other
Okay.
company were my two primary clients, and so I'm not sure that I would have survived the pandemic if I hadn't have joined that team full time. But
Okay.
another thing that really prompted that change was I have this like mantra that freelance isn't freedom. A lot of times people think
Okay.
like, oh, I'm going to live the dream and go off and do my own thing, and there are definitely benefits to that. But
Yeah.
there's also this trap of like if you're not working, you're not getting paid, and so that's where I found myself
Yeah.
a lot of times. And so I was working all the time, and
Okay.
I still work quite a bit just because I love what I do, but really was looking for more stability with our family and not having to wear all
Hmm.
the hats and things like that. So, um,
Yeah.
I was at Zeal for 4 more years after that, and was really just looking for a change. Kind of as I mentioned in the intro, most of my job experience has been within agencies, whether that's Zeal or whether that's
Mhm.
doing freelance or other agencies that I worked to previously. And so, really, just looking for a change. Was
Yeah.
kind of tired of like the whole client model, although I do still have clients, I still do freelance stuff on the side, but just in terms of like a full-time job, wanting to do something
Hmm.
different. And it's kind of interesting, moving from this idea where you're doing a bunch of different things for different clients to like, I'm going to be focused on a single product and trying to
Yeah.
make that the best that I can. And so there's interesting problems that come with that that you don't get to experience in other situations. So far, it's been a really great transition. The Redwood team
Hmm.
has absolutely fantastic. Just really smart minds. In my head, it's one thing if you are trying to use a framework. It's another thing if you're trying to like build the framework that other
Oh
people are
yeah.
going
Yeah.
to use. So like
Totally.
totally
Totally.
hardcore programming that I let a lot of the other engineers do, and I focus on other aspects of it.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah. No, there's definitely. Yeah. To your point about working on a product, like I never really worked at an agency, but like one of the places I worked at, it was like an e-commerce company, and we did have clients. So it wasn't necessarily an agency, but we had kind of like a few long-term clients, and doing that part, I mean, it was still programming, but I soon realized after that work that I really enjoyed working on product, and that's typically what I enjoy doing these days. Because it's like with an agency, for example, it's like you have a client, like say you've got a month to ship out some campaign or something. It goes out and maybe you never work with them again, or maybe they come back again, but it's something completely different versus like, okay, so we've got this feature, we rolled out the MVP, awesome, let's keep iterating on it, and you're in there for the long haul, and in a good way, I think, like, and
Yeah.
it's kind of nice to see something evolve. I find I think that's what I enjoy about it, and y- you know, like working in agile methodologies. It's like I've never worked anywhere where it was perfect or really great, to be honest. So it's like
Yeah.
when it was like, okay, we've got a 3 week sprint, or some places I worked at, it was 2 weeks, and it's like you're always cutting corners because the sprint's over, or like stuff just doesn't make it, or I don't know. Whereas like with the product, like, you know, I mean, sometimes you have to make compromises, but like it's a long-term thing. So, it's like, you know, missing a date by 2 days isn't typically a big issue, unless you do have like
Hmm.
you've set like a hard target date for like some marketing thing perhaps for the product. But typically, it's kind of like, okay, well, we said we're going to release it next week, but we just need a few more days, and, just to get it in a good state. And, that's typically okay, I think. So, and
Hmm.
it's,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And it's,
I think the things that you highlighted are true. It's kind of interesting. I always said that I have to have that agency piece to be able to work on a variety of different projects. But
Yeah.
even when focusing on like a particular product or a particular brand, there's still a lot of that within like a
Hmm.
single product. So like I think we're going to talk about it later, but like the badge app, that was a thing, or the build competition site, that was like another thing.
Yeah.
And both, or even like the conference stuff. So that's like three different projects within a bigger brand or a bigger company that I was able to
Yeah.
do since the time that I've been there. So you still have a lot of those same problems. It's kind of a misnomer that just working on a single product, like you're locked into a single type of job.
Yeah. No, totally, totally. And it's yeah, I'm curious too, prior to Redwood, had you worked in open source at all, or is this all brand new for you, open source?
Yeah, most of the open source stuff that I've done prior has been like my own projects. So I'm like, oh, well, I'll just
Okay.
open source that. I'll make the code public, but it's not so much trying to work with a team of people or like the other interesting thing that I've realized lately is you have a community member that comes along and gets really excited about a project and you want
Yeah.
to enable them to contribute, but at the same time, you're like, okay, is this the direction that we want it to go? And who decides that? Like, do I decide
Yeah.
that? Does David and Tom decide that? Obviously, I don't want to squelch their energy. I want them to contribute, and I want to be an open and welcoming community. But at the same
Yeah.
time, you don't want the project to run away from you.
Yeah. I totally feel that because I've been working in open source professionally since January 2020, and my first open source job was at Dev 2. I ended up leading front end over there after a bit, but um, I remember in the early days, we were a small team, and to your point about like, contributors are super excited. They're like, Dev 2, this is awesome. Let's, I wanna, I don't know, like, think of something ridiculous, but like I wanna put an animation where a shark with lasers and confetti comes out, and we used to like in the early days, it was like, yeah, sure, go for it, and it there wasn't like a full vision of what the product should be. And so like over time, there was never, to be clear, there was never a shark with lasers and confetti on Dev 2, but uh, but like
Bum. Right.
yeah, yeah, exactly. But yeah, looking forward to that PR still. um but we kind of realized, we kind of had to batten down the hatches, like this is like what we want to build out. And to the point about the enthusiasm, we didn't want to like hinder that enthusiasm, but we also had to say like, you know thanks for the suggestion. Like we would have discussions about these things, once we kind of hunkered down a bit better. And so we were able to say like, oh, well, open up a discussion, you know sharks with lasers isn't really direction we're deciding to go with. We're going to do this instead. You know and it still keeps the people's enthusiasm, but because you don't want your project to become this runaway like Frankenstein as well, like
Yep. Yep.
and it's a tough balance because how you communicate. And this isn't just open source, but because there's a lot of asynchronous communication in open source because it's in issues and pull requests, you have to convey that like, this is so awesome, you're excited about it, but unfortunately we're not gonna do that, and that can be tough sometimes, and like, so it's, yeah, it's because I can see it from like the contributor's standpoint too, because I've been a contributor as well as a maintainer, and you're like, oh, okay, but there's still plenty of other stuff, and you can still get and I know Redwood has a really great community, RedwoodJS. So like, there's other ways to just keep people excited still and still be able to contribute to the project. So
Yeah. One other thing that's kind of been interesting about open source is that because there are so many people involved in the community, you also have the opposite happen, where somebody gets excited, it is something that you want, and then for whatever reason, because it is volunteer, they have
yeah,
other things and other commitments come up. And so sometimes tasks that you don't think should take that long do end up taking a while just because you're trying to work
yeah,
around different schedules. And so trying to keep the community engaged can also be a challenge. But you are right. We are very fortunate in that we do have just a fantastic community. And, as I was talking about the core team members, they're really great about jumping into the forums and our Discord
yeah,
and discourse and trying to help people that run into issues. So I think
Yeah.
that that also is really what contributes to making a successful open source project.
Yeah, no, totally. And to your point about you were mentioning before how it's like one thing to use a framework and it's one thing to build a framework. I totally feel that because at my time at Netlify, like my job was to make sure frameworks run on Netlify. And so it wasn't like even though I'd done a lot of front end doesn't really come into that. It's good to know that to understand the framework, but it was just, like we're making sure, okay, is it, generating serverless functions for these particular things? And like it wasn't like full on infrastructure, it was kind of like a level up from Amazon, but like, uh, you know, just understanding like, like, okay, Next.js is generating all these pages. We got to make sure that, it maps to creating the proper functions for those things. And, and that's me kind of bridging to make things work, building a whole framework on its own, even that uh, that on its own already is like just like it's like
I
because
know.
yeah,
Well, and
yeah,
even the stuff that the team's doing right now with React Server components, so much of that is undocumented. And so we're fortunate in that we have a great relationship with the React team, the React core team. And so our developers are constantly talking to them, trying to get documentation or snippets or
yeah,
recommendations like, how do you do this or that? So trying to build a framework on undocumented stuff, or it's not
yeah,
even just React undocumented stuff, it's also Vite undocumented stuff. And
yeah,
trying to put all of those pieces together is a challenge for sure.
yeah. And we've kind of dipped into talking about RedwoodJS now. So I guess yeah, like I wasn't able to attend RedwoodJS Conf. I did catch some of the talks. I still gotta catch up on the back catalog, but I know like when Redwood initially came out, it was a single page application framework and it was using Webpack. And to your point about Vite, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's very recently that you moved to Vite? Is that right?
That's right.
Or,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
totally
okay.
right. So we're on 6.0 right now. And with that 6.0 transition, we are on Vite.
Okay.
There's still, as far as I understand, there's still support for Webpack just because they're really great about making sure that they don't leave users behind. And
Okay, yeah.
things like Storybook are still like first class citizens within the project. And so that uses Webpack. But in terms of the framework itself, all of that is running off of Vite.
Yeah. Yeah, I know I've used Storybook quite a bit. It's a really great tool and it's Webpack based, like you said, but in the past couple of years, they've been able to support other bundlers and like, because like this was before I was working at open source, but I migrated it to Vite, but it's not completely Vite. Like there's a core part of Storybook that still uses Webpack, but then there's another part that's using Vite. I think their plan is to eventually make it all Vite, but yeah, so that makes sense. You still need to have some support for Webpack. But I think it's a great move that you've gone to Vite. And it's not to throw shade on Webpack. Like I always used to be the person that had to set up Webpack on projects. This is before meta frameworks. But like Vite wouldn't exist today without Webpack existing. People innovated to make
Mm-hmm.
something work better and stuff. So just want to give a shout out to Webpack and previous bundlers. But it's
Yeah.
clear that all the can't say all the frameworks, but like a lot of frameworks have moved to Vite, and it's a great move, I think, because Vite is still innovating, and all these frameworks will benefit from it. And I know framework authors are helping contribute back too, so it's just like a exciting time in open source and just collaboration because like people like to bash stuff, but like as somebody that used to work on the frameworks team, I just think it's great seeing all these frameworks out there, because they each one cause others to innovate, and I think it's in the end, it's just great for everything. So yeah,
I totally agree. You have, and you can look across the board at all these different frameworks and how they all influence each other. talking about like signals with Spelt
Yeah.
and people saying, oh, that already existed in other areas. Or, even as we're working on React server components, we're also looking at Next and saying, well, how did they solve that? And do we want a
Yeah.
similar pattern or do we want to innovate on that? And so I just am a firm believer that rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, to your point about Next.js, I haven't worked with React Server components a lot. I had to work on some stuff on the frameworks team to make not make them work, but like just make sure it was working properly. But like I think right now, well, until Redwood released their server components implementation, it was just Next.js, and I think a lot of people confused Next.js and React Server Components. Like, is like, I mean, I know React Server Components is a thing that the React team made, but I think if you're like a newbie coming into web development, you might think that React Server Components are Next.js, but that's not really the case. It's just they just happen to be the first framework to implement them, and uh, it's kind of to your point too, like you were saying about like documentation and examples. Like the only, I mean, real example right now aside, I mean, there's RedwoodJS now, but like it was Next.js. I know Ben Holmes from the Astro team had done a stream with Dan Abramov where they built out like a not a full-fledged framework, but I think they built out like a very bare bones React server components implementation, which was super interesting to see. But like aside from that, there's not a lot of like this is how you do it, I think, you know? So
Yeah. Well, and I know a lot of people get mad because they're like, it seems like Next.js is getting all the attention. But it's also like follow the money. They're paying for people to sit on the React team. Like it only makes sense that they would work together since
yeah,
they're on the same team. So, that's kind of an interesting dynamic, I think, that has played into that misconception.
yeah, no, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, so I guess in terms of like React server components, when did, because I was mentioning you briefly before we started the stream, their name's escaping me, but there was, I think I want to say it's Danny from the core. There's a Danny on the core
Yeah,
team,
that's
isn't
probably
there?
true. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
right.
okay,
That's
yeah.
right. He's been
Yeah,
focusing on a lot of the streaming, the server side
okay.
streaming pieces.
So it was Danny I hung out with on my Twitch stream about a year ago, I think, and this was like I was saying, Redwood was a single page application framework, and then they started incorporating server side rendering, SSR, and I'm pretty sure I'd have to go rewatch that stream, but I think Danny was in the process of implementing that. Like it was still like a beta feature or like an alpha feature. Um, so so that came about, and then was the reason to move to React Server Components just to kind of go ahead with it instead of just regular SR? Like there are benefits to using React Server Components, but like I was saying before, I'm still pretty new to it, so like I don't have
Yeah.
fully formed thoughts on it yet myself, but
Yeah, so some of it comes with we want to be known as a proper React framework. And this is the direction that the React team has said is the thing. And
yeah,
so it only makes sense if the React team has said this is the thing and we're a proper React framework that we would say, okay, great, and implement those features. So that was part of the mindset
okay,
there to be able to implement that within Redwood.
okay, yeah. No, I gotta say for myself, I'm excited to see this. I hadn't really used RedwoodJS before, aside from like the couple streams I've done over the years with a couple of the core team members, just building out like a I don't want to say basic app, but we just kind of went through the motions of this is how like you create a cell and so on, and it's super interesting. But I think leveraging server side rendering will, I think, attract potentially more people to the framework. Not that it wasn't good before, but like it was just single page applications, and I think like I know for myself, although a lot of client side interactivity is awesome, you know, I did want a SSR component to things, so I think you'll probably see an uptick in the framework now that this has come about.
Yeah, I hope so. I think, the biggest benefit that you get with that server side piece is the SEO and metadata pieces.
Hmm.
And so there are a lot of people that will build their web application on Redwood with that client, that spa
Yeah.
infrastructure, but then they'll have their marketing site. And so even though you can do pre-rendering within Redwood, they'll put like their marketing site on like Webflow or Astro or something like that.
Okay.
And so hopefully, like with this new architecture, they will be able to have everything or be more inclined. Right now, you can do it and they're all in
Yeah.
one, but they'll be more inclined to use Redwood for both their marketing pages and their
Yeah.
web application because you get all of that good juiciness included.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I think one of the other things I think is great that the framework decided to do is it's opinionated. Because
Hmm.
when React first came out, it's like React is a library, do whatever you want for state management, do like basically use whatever you want to do anything, we're just the view layer kind of. And whereas something like Angular took the complete opposite direction, which is like, here's literally the whole kitchen sink, and here's 20 toolboxes and so on. And I'm not saying that to knock on Angular. It's just two different approaches. And I remember when because I started learning React in 2015, and I started learning React through open source because at work we were using Angular and I was working in .NET, so I was never gonna use this stack. Um, and in the early days, like everybody would pick things, like they would have before meta frameworks, they would have these boilerplate projects. So you know, and people came up with all these choices, and then you saw, like, for example, like just form libraries in general. There was like Redux form initially, then there was Formic, there's then there's Tanstack form libraries now. There's like, Remix, which is a framework, has their own way of handling, but like there's been all these options to do things. And I like, although giving people a choice on things, I think when you go to build something, you kind of end up with decision paralysis, you know? So,
Yeah.
and I've heard a couple podcasts with uh, Tom Preston Werner, the creator or co-creator of RedwoodJS, and he decided to go with some like well-known things like Storybook. There are other variations of Storybook that people do use, but Storybook is very mature now, and I don't know if it's the industry standard, but it's my go-to if I'm building out components. So having that baked into the framework, um, you know, uh, I know there was heavy inspiration from Rails. I'm not a Rails dev, but like I did some Rails when I was at Dev 2 because it was a Rails backend. So there's this concept of generators just to bootstrap all your pages and stuff. So I think those decisions are it's a good way to go. Like, and I think of it like Prettier. Like some people complain about Prettier. Like, I don't like the way it formats the code. For me though, as somebody that's trying to maintain a code base, I'm like, even if I don't like the way some of it looks, I'm just happy that this tool does the same thing all the time. So
Hmm.
I just think I'm sure people have different opinions about this, but like I think it's good that you went with an opinionated stack to just allow people to build something as opposed to spend 10 months bike shedding on, like, yeah, well, maybe Tailwind, maybe pure CSS, maybe this, I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and honestly, that was one of my first, um, I don't know, one of the things that really made me starstruck or interested in Redwood to begin with, because it was using all the things that I would have picked naturally. It was
Yeah.
using Storybook, it's using Jest, it's using GraphQL, it's using TypeScript, it's using all those pieces that and Prisma, that was the other one I was trying to think of.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But it's using all those things that I would have to put together myself. And the fact that you can just run a single command to create a
Yeah.
project and all of those are built in. And then the
Yeah.
nice thing about the generators piece is one of my biggest beefs with GraphQL is it feels like I'm constantly like rewriting the same thing over and over again
Hmm.
because you have to say like, here's your model. Now I'm gonna write a resolver for it. Now I'm gonna handle it this way. And it just
Yeah.
gets so repetitive. It's like, I feel like I already did this. And the fact that the generators do a lot of that stuff for you so that you really are only writing it once and then
Yeah.
letting Redwood and the code handle everything else for you. So,
Yeah.
I've been impressed by how fast I've been able to move as I write applications and side projects on Redwood. And I think the other thing that's been really nice is that it's really built for scale. So one of the things that
Okay.
Tom kind of brings to the table is his enterprise experience and the fact that he co-founded GitHub. And so he's seen like this is what
Yeah.
it takes to run a large code code base and SaaS application for it to work.
Yeah.
And so seeing a lot of those patterns brought back to Redwood that this is the best way to work with a team. So let's go ahead and set that from the beginning. Even if you're just a startup, that means if it does
Yeah.
scale, if it does take off, you have those best practices built into the framework.
Yeah. No, totally. And honestly, it's the kind of thing like, even if at some point I was like, oh, I don't really like this choice they made in Redwood, the fact that the decision's been made, it just, because like once you start building something, and they've made wise decisions in terms of what they want to include, it's just not worth the bike shedding, like,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
it's,
For
yeah.
sure.
Um,
I think one of
I,
the biggest criticisms that we get is the choice to use GraphQL, which I think it once you understand that you don't have to do all those things yourself, I think that's why people get frustrated with GraphQL. But once you understand you don't have to do all that stuff yourself, it makes it easier to
okay.
use GraphQL. But also with the React Server components stuff that we're using, we're also opening the door to say if you don't want to use GraphQL, you can hook into say like Superbase's API or a lot of these
Okay.
other providers have backend as a service. So we're no longer limiting people or forcing people to use GraphQL in that sense.
Okay. Yeah. So that's good too. Yeah, and I guess that's because with the React server components, you can make your API calls directly like in the
That's
components,
right.
like on the server side, as opposed to like, I guess traditionally with Redwood, it was a single page application. You'd have your cell, which would communicate via GraphQL, I guess.
That's right.
So
That's exactly right.
yeah, yeah. So that's cool that that option's there too. And um, I'm curious, like, I'm asking all this with, like I said, with limited actual real world experience having used React
Mhm.
Server components, but um, so like from my understanding of React Server components, they only render on the server, obviously. So like once they get to the client, there's it comes in as generated a markup, like that's what comes in. If you do your view page source on your browser, and then there's no hydration step to the stuff that got rendered on the server, and then there's the client components, which are using the use client directive in the file. Those are where you get the interactivity and hydration. Um, I'm curious about the cells, and maybe you can speak to a bit about the cells, because I remember them briefly, but that concept, like, does that still exist with React Server components, or is it something that's going away because of React Server components?
Yeah, sure. So I want to jump back to the first point that you made about React Server components and how they're working. You had everything right. The only thing I would also add is you can also have functions that are functions that live inside a client component. So it gets a little
Okay.
crazy, but basically you can have like a React Server component with a client component inside that then can also talk to the server. So it's kind of like this inception thing. But
Okay.
anyway, so you can have kind of both intertwined to some degree.
Okay.
Cells do still exist. So for people that are not familiar with what a cell is, usually when you create a React component and you're talking to a database, you want to have a loading state, an empty state, success state, and error state. So for one little piece of information, suddenly you're talking about four different states that you've got to manage and potentially show four different components depending on what
Yeah.
gets returned back from the server. And so the nice thing about a cell, so this is something that's unique to Redwood, is that it handles all of that for you. So within your cell, and really what makes it a cell is the fact that you would have, say, a GraphQL query at the top, but you're also exporting out a success component. And that's what's called like
Okay.
export const success. So Redwood is kind of magical in the sense that it will run your GraphQL query for you and it will show whatever component within that file that it needs to show. So you'll have a loading
Okay.
component, you'll have your empty component, you'll have your error component, and then you'll have your success component all within that single file. And so it will
Okay.
deliver whatever piece it is. So you don't have to consistently write that logic all throughout your application. Like if this is happening, do this. If this is happening, do this. It will
Okay.
automatically deliver that for you. So some of
Okay.
the things that we're talking about and working through with React Server components hasn't necessarily been determined yet. It's still very early stages. We have several
Okay.
working proofs of concept where do have React Server components and we're delivering that. We also have that piece where I was talking about where we have the React Server component with a client component and a server action inside. We have that working,
Okay.
but trying to make sure that, say, the router is working or make sure that auth is working. All of that is still being worked on.
Okay. No, I'm glad you mentioned the server actions because I actually thought that was a Next.js thing, but it's a React thing.
It's yeah, this is kind of on my edge of knowledge, so I
Okay.
want to be careful with it. But some of the server actions, at least from my experience with using Next, has to also do with like when you submit a form, whether you want that form to run on the server and for it to process that information on the server. But you can also,
Okay.
I do know from our demos that we have a function that is running on the
Okay.
server. So, for example, our very dumbed down demo, it has a React server component that's rendering a counter, and inside we have a client counter, and you can have the two interact with each other, where one is being delivered from the server and
Okay.
then one's being delivered on the client side. So,
Yeah.
you can update the server component from the client using those functions.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny because I tried to Google React server actions and all I get is Next.js documentation.
Yeah, yeah,
But I'll drop it in the chat just if
and
folks want to
I
read about it. But it's kind of weird that it's not in the React docs, or maybe it is. I couldn't find it, but
yeah, that's like another potentially undocumented use case. But I think the
okay.
primary way that you use it with Next is with handling forms. And
Okay. Yeah.
when Next initially announced their app folder directory, with that particular setup, they said this aspect is coming and we haven't created it yet. So I know for a while it was a little frustrating if you're trying to build a Next app because
Yeah.
those features weren't completely built and it wasn't really well documented. But I
Yeah.
think that they've come a long way, even within the last year.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure they'll be announcing stuff next week at their conference.
Hmm.
Um,
That's right.
But uh but yeah, so I'm curious. So you're talking about React server components. Is there like I know it's being actively worked on Redwood. Is there like a version that people can try with like that's not necessarily official release, but can like early
Yeah.
adopters try out Redwood with server components?
Yes, for sure. Let me see if I can find a few links for you to share. I think I also have access to the chat. I didn't pull
Yeah.
up that.
If you don't for some reason, you can chat with me in where I have my video ninja. I'll just say hello so you can see it.
Right.
But yeah, if you have access to the chat, yeah, definitely just drop it in there. So
Yeah, I can definitely do that. So all of this stuff is available within Redwood right now. It is under an experimental flag. So
okay.
if you do that, and I'll also include some documentation. So um, uh, server components. Sorry, I should have had these links ready.
Oh, no worries, no worries. It's a stream. Everything's always like just like
On the fly. So this is the forum post where Toby, who's the main one working on React Server components, he's actively sharing updates, and he has a video even at the top of that forum post where he's like, "This is how easy it is to get started with React Server components," and you can see that really all
Okay.
you're doing is passing in an experimental flag. Um, and there's even some information there with what that demo looks like. But for the let's see, the repo where we have that working, let me see where that is.
Here, I'll go ahead and share this in the, just so folks can see it while you're looking for that. Okay.
I think that's on Toby's. Give me just a second. I think this is on Toby's GitHub.
Okay. Okay, so there's a walkthrough. Okay, and there's instructions on just how to get set up and everything. Okay, so
Yeah,
so
so
it's in the command.
if you go to the very bottom, of that, there was a post that was about 26 days ago. So that was when we were trying to nail down all the demos for the conference that we had.
Okay.
There's
Yeah.
6 different demos in that list where he talks about, there's one with the use client counter component. There's another one showing suspense, another one showing
Okay.
it mutating the server state, which is what I was talking about with that nested server function.
Okay. Yeah.
Um,
Oh,
and
okay.
then one of the things that you get with React Server components is you can asynchronously get a value from a server function. So there's a demo for that. There's a demo showing the form action, and then another one showing it integrating with AI JSX, which is pretty interesting.
Okay.
Nobody's heard of that, but it's an easy way to integrate AI within a JavaScript application. And the
Oh,
company
awesome.
behind that is called Fixie.ai. I'm going to include a link to that as well, but they have become just a great partner as they actually gave a talk and a
Oh,
workshop
okay.
at the conference as well.
Oh, cool. Just want to give a shout out in the chat. We got Yuri from the NX
Oh
team just
yeah.
saying hey. Yeah, I got to hang out with
Oh, he,
Yuri last. I can't remember if it was the start of this year or last. Yeah, it was earlier this year. Yeah, we hung out on stream and he was showing me
oh,
all the
awesome.
goodies in NX. So if you haven't checked out NX, definitely check out NX as well if you're looking for monorepo tasks, all kinds of stuff. The URL is escaping me, Yuri. It's not nx.dev, is it? Feel free to
And
shamelessly
they
plug
just
it
had
in
a
the chat.
conference as well.
Yeah, and I think yeah, NX. Okay, it is nx.dev. Yeah, and I think they secured some funding recently too. So hats off to all of them. Yeah, it's a great project. There's a so definitely check that out and give Yuri a follow on all the places. He's on Twitch too, so definitely check out his stream too. Um, okay, so this is great that you have all these examples here. So it is a work in progress still, but there's stuff that like people can start working with it, give feedback, and okay. Okay, no,
That's
this
right.
is great.
Now, I will also throw out, since we were talking about the server side rendering piece, for the badge app that I worked on, that is using some of the experimental code so that we
Yeah.
could deliver those OG tags. And so we are using that in production, which
Okay.
is pretty cool too.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to share that or if we could even walk through it if you want, or how do you want to go about
Yeah.
talking about that project? And I don't have the link for it, but what we're talking about is
Shoot it over.
Amy made this amazing badge OG image animation, and it was part of the ticket website for RedwoodJS Conf this year. And yeah, it was okay. Yeah, here it is. I'll just copy that and
I
I'll put
think
it
we
in.
took down the link on our domain because the conference is
Okay.
over. But it was hosted on fly.io. And if you've
Okay.
never worked with Fly before, it basically uses a Docker file to be able to have all of their nice integrations
Okay.
and things like that. And then for the database, it's hosted on Neon, which
Okay.
Neon's pretty cool as well. You can branch databases, which I think is fascinating. So as
Oh,
we're
cool.
working with production data, you can have that, but you can also branch it and have staging data. You can also branch it as a developer. You're building out features so that it doesn't ruin or confuse your production data
Oh,
or
that's awesome.
like how you have that set up. Yep.
Yeah. Yuri in the chat saying that conf
Oh,
ticket
thanks.
website was awesome. Need to have a similar one for our site next year.
Uh,
So
Well, and Yuri, the code is open source, so feel free to snag it. So,
there you
and I
go.
can
There you go.
include a link to that as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
definitely want to check out the project. Yeah, I guess uh, we can definitely look at some code if you want. I can load up the project, but maybe you want to kind of speak to. So you mentioned a bit of the tech. So for the OG image, like how, I guess maybe talk us through like how you built this whole thing out. I know, well, one, you have your design background too, and you're very familiar with CSS animations, I think. Is that right?
yeah, so yeah, I can talk about it. So it's kind of an interesting project because it's more complicated in the fact that the user really only sees like 3 pages. You're like, man, there's a
Okay.
lot going on just to show the user 3 pages. But
Yeah.
that's because I also built out an admin system so that we could add different codes for different speakers and different partners. So
Okay.
if you looking at this page right now, it is for Redwood. It says RedwoodJS invites you to, and then there's also the code that it listed below, where that
Yeah.
is RedwoodJS 35 for 35% off. But if you
Yeah.
were to go to something else like /Prisma, it would show Prisma invites you to, and then it would show Prisma 35.
Okay.
And theirs is also 35%. Actually, everybody's is 35%, but it's
Okay.
built in so that it can be dynamic. So I mean, you can even go to /Amy and it'll show
Okay.
me as a speaker. It'll show my avatar and say Amy Dutton invites you to, and then it has my code. So
Okay.
one of the things that we're doing on the back end is like when you click on those links, I can tell how you came to the site. So did you follow a link that I sent out or one that Prisma
Okay.
sent out? And that's really just to show, not that we're trying to be weird about tracking people, but okay, who are our most valuable partners and where are a lot of our people coming from? So
Yeah.
that just gives
Okay.
us a little bit of extra data. So if you fill that in, if you enter your email address, you don't necessarily have to if you don't want to, but if
Yeah, I
you
can
fill
do that.
that in, it'll take you. Okay, it'll take you to another page. So it says you're in, and you should get an email. So talking a little bit more about the tech behind it, we're using Resend, which Resend
Okay.
is another fantastic product. We actually had Zeno, who's the CEO, on Compressed, and
Okay.
they're a Y Combinator company. But it was really interesting to hear him talk about his product because he was like, email has been around for years. And so he's like, how
Yeah.
do you innovate on something that's been around for forever? And so they're really hyper focused on the developer and the developer experience because he's like,
Okay.
you do have great services that are already out there, like Postmark. But if you've ever tried to use Postmark, you have to email them and ask them to approve your account.
Oh, okay.
Whereas
Okay.
like with Resend, they automatically give you everything that you need to start hacking on the project. Um,
Okay.
and even if you look at, I think some of their marketing message, they say, yeah, integrate this afternoon. Which, fun fact,
Okay.
if you revisit the site multiple times, at night it'll say integrate this evening or integrate this morning. So just a
Okay.
little, I guess, Easter egg ish that they integrate with the site. But anyways, you get an email that has all of the information that you need. Now, if you click how to make it, now make it yours and
Okay.
customize your ticket, then it'll ask you to integrate with GitHub.
Okay.
And this is working on, so with Redwood, there's a web folder and an API folder. And it's really nice in terms of separation of concerns because you
Okay.
have your GraphQL and you have server side functions and a bunch of other stuff that's running within that API folder. So there's functionality there that sets all of that up within that
Okay.
API folder if you're looking at the code. So
Okay. Yeah.
once you integrate it with GitHub, what that does is you can see it pulled in just public information that you have on your GitHub profile page. So it pulled in your first and last name, it pulled in your company, and it pulled in your picture. Um,
Okay.
so
Yeah.
from there, let's see, I think you're on the invite page. It should have had 4 share buttons. So I don't know if that's what it does. Maybe it's because you're on Arc, I think, right? So Arc probably has some
Oh,
privacy
okay.
things with cookies.
Oh, could be.
Which is
Yeah.
totally fine. But um, otherwise, because it's with cookies and I'm determining what information to show. On the
Oh, okay.
other
Okay.
version, you have 4 different buttons where it says share to Twitter. You can also download the image. You can also, what else can you do? You can download the calendar link, and then you can
Okay.
also copy that invite URL. And so when you
Okay.
copy that invite URL, then you actually get a unique link to send off to somebody. And so it would say like Prisma and Amy Dutton invite you to the
Okay. Okay.
RedwoodJS conference.
No, that's cool.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so we can, and so then on the back end, like I said, it's just basically CRUD information to be
Okay.
able to add avatars for the speakers, logos for the partners, and whatever those codes are. Um,
Okay.
so, and then in terms of getting into like the details with the tech, so the badge is actually using green sock animation. So
Oh,
green
okay.
sock is typically you'll see it as GSAP, and that company has been you probably know this, Nick, but I'm just share it for your listeners. Green Sock has been around for years and years. Like they, a long time ago, had this Flash plugin that was really great for helping with Flash animations. And then when Flash no longer became a thing, they've migrated over to JavaScript. And it really is, I think, the industry standard in terms of being able to create these JavaScript timelines. Or, in fact, a lot of ads will use
Okay.
the GSAP Lite stuff to be able to animate that ad if it's like an HTML ad. So
Okay.
what I'm doing here is that top string that from the lanyard that comes down to that clip is really
Yeah.
just an SVG. And
Oh,
so
okay.
it's like two, and if you pull on it, you can see the edges of it. We're like, oh, that's like really
Okay.
just
Yeah.
two rectangles that are coming down. You can kind of
Okay.
see it sometimes if you're if you look really carefully. I mean, this is like showing like the wizard right behind the curtain. You can kind of see it break a little bit at the top or like down at the badge. And what's interesting, actually, I don't know if it's that interesting, but so I was working on a blog post this morning trying to explain how this particular animation was built. I'll share this in the chat. One of my
Okay.
hacks when I'm trying to develop something that's maybe a little bit difficult or hard is just to break it down one piece at a time. It's like that old
Hmm.
like riddle, or how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time. So when I started thinking, okay, how am I gonna build this app, like this badge piece? Like I have an idea for how I want it to animate, but how do I do it? So I'll pull stuff
Yeah.
into CodePen and just say I'm going to isolate this one thing and see if I can get it to work in CodePen, so I'm not distracted by all this other functionality, not distracted by
Okay.
trying to make this badge dynamic and load in other pieces. So if you look at the CodePen, I shared it in the chat, it is just just
Okay.
like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
tag, and you can see I've tweaked the animation a little bit since then. But it
Yeah.
gives you just, okay, that's what the HTML for it looks like when it's nice and plain, is that it's really
Okay.
just an SVG at the top. And I'm kind of an SVG snob, but I
Okay.
have, in this case, I have two different lines that I've drawn, where I have, this is the X1 coordinate, the Y1 coordinate, Y2 coordinate, and the X2 coordinate. So you can just think of it, if you remember like high school math, we're just drawing coordinates on a plane.
Okay.
And then I have another line. And so and they're labeled with IDs to say chord back and chord front. And then
Okay.
right below the SVG, I have the actual badge. So then all you're doing within the time, sorry, if you look at the CSS, all that's doing is just placing the badge on the page.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
JavaScript there, I created constants for all the different pieces that I was going to work with, just to make it easy to call those by name instead of having to call them by their IDs each time.
Okay.
And then with GreenSock, they have like functionality built in so that you can make everything like draggable. So then it's like, okay, let's just make the badge draggable.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so you can see there's code there for that where I say draggable.create. And then there's functions that it gives you within the library for like, this is what happens when you press down on the badge, or this is what happens when you drag the badge. And so
Okay.
really the main thing that I have to do when I'm dragging that badge is make sure that the cord animates to go with it. And so since
Okay.
those top coordinates are fixed at the top, I'm really just moving those bottom coordinates that are where the badge is attached. And
Okay.
then when you release it, so then you're saying when let's see, I have on drag, on release, I generally know where I want it to snap to. And this is where I kind of cheated the system. You can do things that within GreenSock that are more dynamic, where I'd have it like figure out the inertia and the physics of everything. But
Okay.
again, just in the interest of trying to move fast and keep things simple, I just animated like this is how it's going to swing every time. So in
Okay.
reality, if you were to not pull it a lot, it shouldn't swing very much. If you pulled it a great amount, then you should have a huge swing back. In
Okay.
this case, it just does the same animation every time, and I just swung it back and forth a few times before it settles.
Okay. That's cool. I love that you shared the code pen because it's just so great to show an idea, you know, and then to go to like what it actually is, you know? Because like
Yeah,
I don't know, I think uh like I get even myself I get intimidated by animations. I know stuff like Green Sock uh
yeah.
definitely make this a lot easier. Like so a friend of mine, Jay Tompkins, who I feel like you probably know, uh is always doing amazing like wild creations with just pushing the platform and all kinds of stuff. Like he's got like anyways, it's you know, so but I love this kind of like, you know, because like obviously here you change the colors a bit and then you put the actual badge where the red rectangle is, but you know it's a good example of showing how you can build out something piece by piece, you know. So it's a and it's cool to see them
It's
side by side.
Yeah, it's ironic that you mentioned Jay's stuff because I just shared another link in the chat. But the
Okay.
inspiration for this project was a code pen that he did. So
Okay.
he had this impossible light switch
Oh
where if
yeah,
you
yeah,
pull
yeah.
the little
I remember
string on
this.
the light switch, it swings up, swings back and forth, and then this bear comes and turns it off. And so
Yeah.
I love this. My kids loved it. I spent far more time playing with it and trying to like just break down
Yeah,
the
yeah.
code that he wrote and trying to build mine. Now, his is slightly different in how he handles everything. So he actually animated a squiggly line, and it will.
Yeah,
He's
okay.
using Green Socks. They have a plugin called SVG Morph, where you
Okay.
can say like you draw a line and then say morph it over to this, and then morph it over to here. So he has like his just feels a little bit more fluid.
Okay.
The unfortunate, maybe fortunate thing, however you choose to look at it, is that with Green Sock's pricing model, their business
Okay.
model, you have to pay for that particular plugin. So I was trying to do things
Okay,
without
yeah.
having to pay for everything, especially since this was going to be an open source project
Oh yeah,
and
yeah.
wanting to make that accessible for everybody.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. Because I imagine you're a CodePen Pro user and you get those things for free to use when you're building out CodePens, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
Is that
I
right?
don't know
The
if you have to
plugins?
be a pro. I don't think you have to be a pro user. I think they will give it to you no matter what. I think that's part of
Oh, okay, okay.
whatever license agreement that Green Sox worked out with CodePen. So, like, even if you go to Green Sox website, they just updated it really within the last week or so, which is kind of a
Okay.
beautiful site and neat to see how they've iterated on it. But if you look at their pricing page, it says basically for all their plugins, they're free to experiment with on CodePen.
Oh, okay, okay. Oh, that's awesome. And this is, I don't know, as somebody who's done a lot of front end, I'm not a designer. I like people can give me stuff and I can like create it for them once they've given me something. But I'm the kind of person that's like, okay, let me start a new blog. 2 weeks later, I think I figured out what font I should use, you know. And like even with sites like Google Fonts, you know, where they let you pair and stuff, I struggle with all these things.
Mhm.
But like once I get the designs and stuff, I can bring them to life. But I'm bringing this up because one, I love the font you chose on the ticket badge and just the
Oh, thank you.
colors. It just it pops really well. So
Oh, thank you.
I always appreciate good design because I know I'm not good at it.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think, everybody has their own little wizardry that gets, confusing for other people. So there's plenty
Yeah,
of things on the back end and complex coding stuff that is way over my head.
yeah.
So talking about
I'll
like using frameworks versus building it, I definitely fall on the using side.
yeah, yeah. I'll yeah, I know you dropped it in the chat before, but I'll just put it on the screen here for folks to see. So uh check out the ticket badge app. I'm definitely gonna take a peek at this. And this
Yes, I can point out. Do you have
Yeah,
time?
sorry, go ahead.
I can point out a few more things that's kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, yeah, we got
Um,
like another
with
30 minutes if you got time. So
Oh, perfect. We got plenty of time.
yeah, yeah.
So if you're new to Redwood, kind of what I mentioned before is there's a web folder, and there's also an API folder. So
Okay.
in terms of the pieces that we just walked through, everything's in that web directory. And then if you go
Okay.
to the source directory, all the other pieces are there. Now, the way that Redwood works is that there is a routes.js if you're using JavaScript, TS if you're using TypeScript. But that, if you're coming from like, say, Next or Remix, they use more of a folder based structure or a file based
Okay, yeah.
structure where your files determine whether you have pages or not. But within Redwood, and this is kind of coming from that Rails influence you were talking about, you have a routes directory that says these are all the page routes. So you can see all the different pages that are being used to make those 3 pages available to the front end. So
Okay.
um, this structure is a little bit different, but one thing that I really like about it is that you can just the reusability of code, but also you can
Hmm.
tell at a single glance without having to dig through folders what all of your routes are and what pages are available. So I
Yeah.
point that out as we were talking about that source directory structure to kind of say there's also a pages directory, there's a layout directory, and there's a components directory. And so within the
Okay.
components directory, you'll also see the components to make that badge work that we were just looking at. And then you'll also see some cells. So we were talking about those cells
Oh
earlier.
yeah.
There's is it the badge
RSC.
cell,
Yeah.
like a participant cell, and so that's anytime
Okay.
I'm loading data from the server that I want that information to be displayed on the site. I use those cells to
Okay.
query for that. So right there on line 7 is your GraphQL query. And then you can
Okay.
see here, I have different loading states.
Okay.
So I didn't do anything complex, but if you were working on a, you know, really well designed enterprise application, you'd have nice loaders built in with good fail messages and things like that.
Okay. But again, getting back to the cells and like the Rails kind of inspiration, this is all, I mean, you've modified it, but these were all bootstrapped when you ran the generator to create a new cell. So
That's right.
like the
That's right.
yeah, yeah, and um yeah, just
So one
yeah.
thing that I think that at least was interesting to me to work on was creating these unique OG tags. So,
Okay.
or images. So if you say like share a GitHub repo, it will show you a unique image for that repo that says this is the name of the repo. It'll probably show your avatar and maybe how many commits or issues, or whatever.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we wanted to do is when you share it to be able to say like this person is sharing it. I mean, that's kind of like the magical piece of it. So if
Yeah.
you within Redwood, you can set metadata that will inject that information in. So when a user gets added, it will use that meta component to stick that into the header. But
Okay.
to generate we can look at that a little bit more. But to generate the images, what I did was I used a third party called
Okay.
um, APIFlash.com. I'll share a link to that
API.
within the chat. And so, what this service does is it allows you to convert an HTML page into an image. And
Okay.
I've tried to do a little bit of digging, like how are they doing this? And again, this is me trying to move fast. And so, instead of trying to reinvent
Yeah.
the wheel, let's just use something somebody else has already built. But I believe they're using Lambda servers and functions to be able to, I think, render the page and then take a screenshot.
Okay.
Cloudinary has a similar service, but they're actually, I think, using a third party. And the difference is with the functionality that they provide is you can't control the size of the image. So I have
Oh,
a
okay.
badge that I'm trying to take an image of, or an OG tag that I want a very specific dimension. And so with the API Flash within their documentation, you can pass in specific parameters for the width and the height almost like
Okay.
kind of like a media query almost, because if you're trying to change the size of something. But
Okay.
basically, all I had to do was rebuild that image within React with just using HTML and CSS, which made it really
Okay.
nice. When I already have a component for the badge, I can reuse that same component, just stick it on a page and tell API Flash, this is the image that I want you to build.
Okay.
So anytime somebody, let me see if I can find the exact file that that's in. If you want to look at the code for that,
Yeah, it's one of the
give me
OG
just
files,
this.
I'm guessing.
Um, let's see. I Where did I stick it?
I've got a
Yes, I
list
think
here.
so. If um, Yeah, so if you look at the OG participant cell, I think this is the
Okay.
one where it's generate. This is the component that's just displaying that information. And I think I probably have a route that
Okay.
just displays an empty page with that particular component on it. But you can see in
Okay.
terms of the query, it's grabbing that information from the database and then it's displaying that. So
Okay. Yeah.
the component itself doesn't look very crazy because then I'm just displaying it on the page. Let me
Yeah.
see if I can find the API
Okay. Yeah. I see you got
Flash
the
piece.
participants avatar, their name.
Hmm. Let's see if I can find this.
Yeah. No, I definitely like the customization aspect, especially like the invite, like Amy invited you or so on, it's
Hmm.
like you said, it's not so much to be weird with tracking stuff. It's a nice touch. It's a
Hmm. Well, thank you. I was trying to think. Let me see if I can find. Actually, it's probably easier if I pull up VS Code and search in my projects.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Um,
I can load this up in VS Code too if you want.
I think I can find the file. I just wanted to find where API Flash was getting loaded.
Okay. I'm just
Because
gonna
one of the
zoom out for a
things,
second.
if I can kind of talk about it, and then I'm not sure if I can talk and look at the same time, but I'll talk about it first.
Yeah,
So
cool.
if you click, I mentioned when you get to that last page, there's four buttons there, and one of them was to download your badge image. And so if you do that, then it just automatically displays that image that you get from API Flash. That it takes that React component that's in HTML and CSS, it converts it to the image. That is just displaying that from API Flash. Like I didn't
Okay.
feel like there was a need to cache that, because if you're going to register, more than likely you're just going to load that image in once and then download it. If you did happen to try and pull it up a couple of times, that's not too much of a deal. But where
Okay.
I was more concerned about using like API Flash credits is if you were to share out that link and your OG image tag. I have no control over how many times that gets shared over the internet or where that gets shared. And so
Okay.
one of the things that I wanted to do is that when you go through that whole process, it will use API Flash to create that image. And then I actually grab that image and upload it to Cloudinary. So Cloudinary
Okay.
delivers that OG tag for me so that it's not having to constantly ping API Flash to generate that image.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So that
Gotcha.
I just point that out to say it's like the same service, but I'm handling it in two different ways.
Okay. Uh, uh,
I
I
was
had a
gonna see if I
question.
could find the
I, I,
code.
pu-
Yeah,
I pulled it down into VS Code, but I'm trying to remember. I'm
yeah,
supposed to use Yarn right now, right? For
that's right. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
yeah,
right. So you can say yarn install and then yarn RW, short for Redwood dev, or you can even type out yarn Redwood dev.
yeah. No,
Um,
I
so
okay,
one of the reasons that we went with Yarn is because you have support for workspaces. So we've been talking about that API folder and that web folder, is that Yarn allows you to have a workspace and operate with both. So
okay,
what Yarn Redwood Dev does is it will launch your API folder, your API side, your server side, and then it'll also launch your website for you
okay.
with a
Cool,
single
cool.
command.
Yeah, I pulled it down because I was curious. So, um,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
okay, cool. And uh, I don't know if I have everything set up, but if I want to start the project, it's, is it npm start? Okay, yeah, it looks like it.
Yarn Redwood Dev. So you'd say
Okay.
yarn RW Dev. And then I think you probably don't have all the environmental variables.
Okay.
So run it. There's there's several that you need for like the database and what else are there's a environmental defaults file there, but
Okay.
you'd also have to create several API keys in order for everything to work because there's like a Cloudinary key, the
Oh,
API
okay,
flash
okay, yeah,
key,
yeah.
the GitHub OAuth client secret key.
Okay. Yeah. It
Um,
it it did build it, but yeah, I have a feeling it'll probably not.
it's
Oh, wait.
probably
Oh, I've got
well,
it.
it's
I've
there
got this at
except for
least.
the database. Yeah, there's something
Yeah.
went wrong. It's related to the database piece.
Okay.
So I talked here since you have the actually, if you want to go back to the code, I'll point out a few more things that I really liked about it, and think I think I'll just talk about them. Um, Inside the API source directory,
Okay.
there's a folder called mail,
Okay.
and
Oh, tick.
inside there's the ticket email. So,
Okay. Yeah.
I mentioned earlier that we're using recent, and then this is using the React email uh,
Okay.
components that comes from like the recent labs. But this is like, I don't know if you've ever had to code an HTML email. It's a pain. It's
It's
terrible.
I had to do it at Dev 2, and at least when I did it, this was a couple years ago, like I still had to include all the Outlook like conditional weird comments and
It's
stuff, and
miserable. It's
it was a nightmare.
miserable.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is hands down the easiest email that I've ever developed.
Okay.
So, and some of that's just, again, goes back to the recent labs and what they're doing with React email. But if you'll notice, there is a Tailwind wrapper, and I'm using Tailwind CSS within the email,
Okay.
which is just wonderful. Like, I love
Okay, that's nice.
whenever I've coded other things, I like do everything in line to make sure, because you don't know how Gmail is going to handle a style sheet
Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. For folks who haven't done email like that, a lot of it has to be inline because you can't, like, there's no guarantee that like your attached like source for CSS is gonna get pulled in, and there's like there's all kind like there's so many gotchas that I don't know about
I
HTML
know.
email that I know there's a lot, but that's cool
Yeah.
that you can do Tailwind. I guess it does it generate it into inline styles after or something or.
Yeah, like it handles it's just magic.
Yeah,
It
well, we'll leave
handles
it at that. It's
everything.
just
Well, and
magic, people.
the other thing that's really interesting, if you scroll to the top of the component, you can see all the props that I pass in. And if you notice
Okay.
inside the template, there's like variables. So that
Okay, okay.
it was very easy to basically call this mail function. So again, this is happening on the server uh,
Yeah.
that Redwood provides, and we're passing in those props, and then it generates that email for you. So, and
Okay.
then the part that I wanted to demo that I'm not sure if we'll be able to pull up or not, but Redwood has a studio that here, let me
Okay.
include a link to that at least. Um,
Yeah.
but their studio is like, I feel like the just an unsung hero of Redwood. Let me stick this in the chat. Um,
Yeah.
so
I'll
with
try and pull it.
this is another forum post, but this will give you a little bit of documentation. There's also a video there where it talks about some of the functionality that goes on behind it. And actually, I think the
Okay.
design that you see in the the video is outdated. I think it's been updated and looks a little bit better now. But all
Okay.
this to say, within Studio, it does a whole bunch of stuff. The how this pertains to this conversation is that there is a email viewer within Studio. So if you again, if you've ever had to code email stuff,
Yeah.
not only is it terrible to write, but then you're constantly going to your email folder saying, did it come through? Is it in
Yeah.
spam? Like, where did
Oh,
it go?
yeah.
So
Yeah, yeah.
one of the nice things about Studio is there's a check in the code, which I can also pull up, but there's a check in the code, a conditional that says, hey, if you're in a development environment go ahead and
Mhm.
catch this within Studio. And so what
Okay.
Studio will do is it'll catch the email and you can preview the email right within Studio. Um, so every email that comes through, you can see what that looks like. It will also allow you to preview your templates and you can toggle through all your templates and see what those look like. You can
Okay.
check it in different use cases and things like that. But Studio does a whole lot of other interesting things, like you can see from the screen that you have pulled up. It will also do
Yeah.
performance check analytics and things like that to show you, okay, when you make a GraphQL call, how many calls to the database are you actually making?
Okay.
And different SQL statement logging and things like that. So it does a lot, but I feel
Yeah.
like it's this hidden gem in Redwood.
Yeah. No, that's really nice because like you can obviously find these things yourself, but by consolidating them into like one area, like as a development tool, it's super handy because I think I caught I don't know if this was part of Tom's keynote or one of his talks because I remember catching this part when he talked about RedwoodJS Studio and like typically what I do is like when I'm checking network calls and stuff, I'll open my browser dev tools. I'll see, okay, what's happening, what's the payload, or maybe I'll use a tool like curl to if I need to get more information maybe. So it's kind of nice that you have this one-stop shop to see these things. It doesn't mean you can't go into those other tools still, but it's kind of nice to
Right.
get this immediate feedback in one place, I think.
Yeah. Well, and it also gives you some nice graphing to show how things are loading and stuff like that.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
And yeah, so
there's a whole
folks.
bunch of tools within Studio. Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So if folks do want to install it, I'll drop it in the chat here. Well, Amy dropped the link to it, but you can just run that and start the experimental studio. And
Yep.
well, so once
And
the
actually,
studio,
I
sorry,
was
go
going to
ahead.
say that might be one of the reasons why you're getting that something went wrong is you have, once you install it, you have to be running that command when you run
Oh,
yarn
okay.
redwood dev.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. But that's neat. So so is this like right now it's a separate, oh, it's not even a separate package. It's part of Redwood baked in.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
I
That's
think you
nice.
are using if I remember correctly, you're still using the experimental flag, but it is already included. Like it's
Oh, okay. Okay.
already, like it's stable, but we haven't, like, I don't know,
Yeah,
made a bigger deal about it.
it's not official yet, but like uh
Yeah,
it
right.
it it,
It's done
it kind
or
of
done-ish.
yeah, it kind of makes me think about Gmail for folks who've been around a little longer like me. Gmail was in beta for like 10, 11 years,
I
I
forgot
think,
about that. It was like a
and
joke.
it
It was like a
yeah, no, and it was like, yeah, I guess it was kind of genius on their part because like this is an amazing product, but if something goes wrong, it's still it's still beta. So maybe
yeah.
you could go that route if you're just like, yeah, it's amazing, but if something breaks, it's it's still experimental.
It's
So
in beta.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
Hilarious.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so yeah, so there's yeah, so to kind of recap some of the big things that have been happening in Redwood. So we've got React server components on the way. We've got Redwood Studio. We've got there's still support for cells, but and GraphQL, but you can opt into other things like just using straight up database if you want, or whether that's through Prisma or just directly, I guess. Was that what you were
That's
saying
right.
before? I'm trying to, yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And then
yeah.
we also migrated to Vite. That would probably be the other
Oh yeah,
most
and V,
recent
yeah.
update.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's huge. That's awesome. Yeah, no, I gotta think of something to build because I want to dig into all this stuff because I think it's also great that there's some healthy competition to have another React framework that's got server components in them. So
Yeah,
and there's
yeah.
a yeah.
One one thing I might throw out just to anybody that's on the fence is Redwood has been around for a while. So we've been around for 4 years. So I know there's some people that are like, oh, what is this new thing? And it might be new to them, but it is stable. So we're in version 6. You can use it in
Yeah.
production. There are some companies, enterprise wise, that have like thousands of users, millions of database rows, and things like that. And it has been a great success story.
Yeah. And we haven't really talked about it, but just because I've listened to a few podcasts with Tom talking about Redwood and stuff, and I know there's some, I don't remember what it's called, but there's some kind of like innovation fund for startup
Yeah.
that like obviously we want you to use Redwood, but you know like I forget all the details about it, but there's some kind of incubator program I think, isn't there?
Yeah, so we do have the Redwood Startup Club, and
Okay, that's what it's called.
that's like a I don't know if that's like application. I don't know how they decide who gets in and who doesn't. But I'm just saying that to say there is some protection around the founders that are a part of that. But we offer support for founders that are building. Now, I think what you were talking about is the Redwood Startup Fund, and
Okay,
I
yeah.
included a link below. And you can apply to be a part of this startup fund if you are building a project in Redwood. So
Okay.
that's kind of a neat way that Tom is supporting people that have decided to build on top of Redwood. And another thing that is worth mentioning, since we were talking about fundraising, is
Yeah.
that um, for companies that have built on top of Redwood, they collectively have raised more than $70 million. So in terms
Holy
of
moly.
viability of an option, I think that yeah, that definitely carries some weight.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. And that's awesome. Yeah, we don't have to go the whole time, but we got about 10 minutes still here. It's this is all super cool, and I think it's awesome that you joined the team. Like I'm a big fan of open source. It's uh, I I can say for my own career, like as soon as I started getting into open source, it's just opened up so many doors for me and like opportunities. Like I started contributing in 2015, and it's like I'm giving a talk tomorrow about this, but like it's super intimidating when people first start off in open source, or at least I found it super intimidating.
Hmm.
I was working in .NET at the time, and we weren't even using Git. We were using a Microsoft thing called Team Foundation Server, and so like aside from doing the contribution, it was like I didn't really know Git as well, and it's like you pull down the branch, and then it's like I don't know. I was just not in my element, yet. And but like I stuck with it, and it's just been pretty amazing. It's basically my last three jobs have all been open source, and it's because I've been contributing on open source, and to points we were talking about too, like I think one of the reasons why I love working in open source, aside from working out in the open, if you can get past that, tear off the band-aid of oh no, everybody sees my code, I think you'll be okay. But it's also, I mean, there's always terrible people on the internet, but like in general, I've just had great experiences with the developer community in open source and developer community in general. So yeah, I just want to give a shout out to open source. So
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that, since we talked about the compressed podcast, Brian Douglas was on. He, in fact, was our first official guest that we had for an
oh no
interview
way,
episode.
didn't
And
know that.
one of the
Okay.
questions that one of the questions we asked him was like, okay, for a beginning dev, where do you start? And he's like, start with
Yeah,
open source. And I remember sitting there like, what? Like, why? Why would you tell them like they don't really know what they're doing? But then he
yeah,
made a case for it and was just saying like if you want to learn like to be a part of a team before you're part of a team, this is a great
yeah,
way. And he was like, what developer is not going to also invest in you if you come to
yeah,
them and say, hey, I believe in your project and I want to help, what can I do? Of course they're going to sit down and help you. And a lot of times maintainers have functionality that they want to add, they know how to add
hmm,
it, they just don't necessarily have the time. And so
yeah,
for a junior, you can say, okay, like a good first issue, these are the things that needs to happen, this is the logic, this is where it goes, and then a junior can come along and actually execute that and get feedback on their code. Like that's invaluable experience. And to your point, just
yeah,
is so helpful when you're trying to find a job or use that as a resume or a portfolio builder.
Yeah, no, totally, totally. And yeah, no, that's awesome. Um, yeah, we just got a couple minutes here. Like, I guess any last thoughts? I definitely want to plug a lot of the stuff you do because I think it's pretty awesome. But like, there's
Thank you.
I'll drop it in the chat. But compressed FM, if you haven't checked it out and you're looking for a good tech podcast, I can't recommend it enough. So I'm just gonna
Thank
shamelessly
you.
plug it for Amy, and so she doesn't have to. Um,
Thank you.
yeah, no, it's great, and yeah, it's just I don't know. I just still think it's super cool that you've moved into open source and stuff, and it's I'm just excited to see all the cool stuff you and the team do, and yeah, it's
Awesome.
awesome.
Thank you.
Cool, cool.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I would plug is I don't know if Twitter's really a thing anymore. If it is, you can follow me if you're
Oh
still
yeah,
there.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah,
Um,
I can
but
drop all your
I
links here. There you go.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. I am pretty active or try to be somewhat active on Twitter. That's probably the best way to reach out to me if you want to have a direct conversation. And then if you're
Okay.
looking at getting into Redwood, I would say the best place to start is for now. Hopefully, we can improve and make it better, but would be the tutorial. So if you go to
Okay.
redwoodjs.com, there's a link there in the hero section to start the tutorial. And the nice thing about this tutorial is it walks you through basically every aspect of Redwood as you build out a
Okay.
block. So it'll talk about Storybook. It'll talk about what it looks like to write tests and use the generators. And we'll talk about GraphQL. And so even if you're just, if you don't know a lot about all of those technologies, it's a great way to get started and
Okay.
exactly see what all that's about. I'd also say join the Discord because the server that we have a couple guys there that help maintain everything. They do an absolute fantastic job of building the community. And so if you
Okay.
have questions or want to get connected, that's a great place.
Awesome. Well, this has been super cool. Thanks again, Amy, for taking the time to hang out.
Thanks for
I
having
know
me.
you have a lot on the go. Um, I'll just mention for next week, let me find my schedule here. I'll just drop it. Uh, gonna be hanging with Scott Steinledge next Monday. You probably know Scott from like JavaScript Jam and from Edgio. Gonna be hanging out with him. We're gonna be talking kind of the business side of things as well as some tech stuff, and then also have coming up. It's escaping me right now. Let me just check the schedule. Uh, oh yeah. Uh, and not next week, but the following week, gonna be hanging out with a friend of mine, Todd Libby. We're gonna be hunting for accessibility bugs. So we're gonna kind of do a mini audit of the open source code base. I started there about a month ago. I had been contributing a bit prior, but there's some stuff I've noticed, and it's just want to make the application as accessible as possible. So we're gonna find some things there. If you're looking to get an open source too, there'll probably be some good first issues that come out of this. So that's in a couple weeks too. So check that out too. And yeah, thanks everybody for hanging today. And we'll see you next week. Amy, if you just don't mind staying on for 1 second, and take care,
Yeah,
everybody.
perfect. Thank you again.
Yeah, no, thanks.